Now let's look at a different stream that perhaps has one of the most exciting careers available. Unfortunately, gets a lot of bad press and very few takers because individuals think that the amount of scope with humanities is slightly lesser. But that does not hold true if you really look at the kind of options that are open with each individual subject. Now, with the humanities, the common misconception is that it does not have the same types or the same number of career options like the sciences do. But today we'll discuss a couple of options that are open with each of these elements or each of these subjects that are being taught in school. Now, one of the first careers with the humanities, the study of mind and behavior. You guessed it right, psychology. Now, psychology has applications in any part of the world, in any space, wherever you need to understand other people. Now, psychology is not only a space where one can become a therapist or a counselor. I've seen psychology today being used in various elements across the world. Now, let's look at an example of that. Whether you're looking at how a building is being built, let's say, for example, how today shopping malls are built, they're being built around understanding user and retail behavior. If you notice how games are being designed today, you have a psychologist who's actually helping you figure out what are the best types of colors to use, what are the best types of gameplays to make, so that the user does not feel fatigued or does not get tired during that gameplay as well. So you see very exciting applications to psychology as well. Apart from that, psychologists also have worked in the entertainment sector. If you are someone who likes horror movies, you guessed it right, psychologists have a role to play in that too. Now let's look at a couple of options with psychology and the pathways to it on the career portal.
Hi, and welcome back to the portal. Let's look at the next set of careers with humanities. And like we mentioned earlier, we are looking at the careers that are linked to a very flexible stream. So we are going to start with careers in psychology. A student can simply type this on the career portal, and you would find a variety of specializations already mentioned here. So, as we today see psychology's application in almost any sphere that you can think of, and like I mentioned earlier, it is a study of mind and behavior. Where do you use psychology in application? We've seen architects use psychology to be able to make buildings better for the types of users that are going to use that building. We've seen psychologists play a very important role in areas like therapy, in counseling, and in education. So let's look at psychologists as a career first. We've also seen clinical psychologists are the ones who work in the medical or the healthcare setup. We've seen developmental psychologists who understand behavior of children. Earlier, this focus was solely on children, but this has moved on to many other applications too. And it was broadly called as child psychology. You would have counselors and guidance counselors like yourselves in schools as well. We've also seen areas like forensic psychology. Now, when it comes to subject combinations, a student can study an undergrad in psychology after pursuing any scheme of studies in 11th and 12th. They can pursue a postgraduate degree in psychology as well, and they could do so without even studying psychology in graduation. So that is also one option that is not mentioned here in detail, but we will look to add this element as well. To look at the other areas of application, we've seen forensic psychologists who work at aspects in the legal nature. We've seen social psychologists who are very much into understanding how individuals behave in groups. Industry and organizational behavioral psychologists who also work in the human resources department. Environmental psychologists, because fundamentally it is the understanding of the relationship between people and their surroundings. So you might have noticed sports psychology as one of the options under psychology there. We have discussed sports management as one of the careers that could be an intersection between a student's interest and an academic area. Similarly, psychology as well. A student can look into sports psychology, work with players, because ultimately, athletes who perform at the highest level, uh, their mindset on that given day when they're performing is extremely important. So you might notice even your students, or if any of you are into sports, you might notice that your mood has a very important role to play in how you perform. So psychologists are important there too. We have seen psychologists also work in other areas where they have been consulted. They have been consultants, like for example in game design. Psychologists have been consulted on what types of colors to use to ensure that user is engaged. We have seen psychologists being consulted in the making of movies as well. A particular application in horror movies too, because they kind of devise the most effective method where you get those jump scares. So if you or your students are horror buff fans, there's a chance that a psychologist probably has worked with the movie director and the filmmakers to be able to make the most immersive experience for you. So while we look at the other specializations mentioned here, students are recommended to read them in detail. I have just explained some of them. The educational requirements would range from 15 to 23 years, depending on whether the student wants to pursue a master's and PhD. Typically, more number of job opportunities are open after the master's degree. The kind of specializations mentioned, they usually are available at the master's level. At the undergrad level, a BA or a BSc psychology course is available where a more general overview of these elements are mentioned. So, a BSc psychology typically focuses a little more on research, on analytics, on behavioral sciences than the bachelor's in arts and psychology. So, if a student wants to go more into research, then a BSc psychology would be more preferable. The types of job opportunities, job profiles are mentioned here. And coming to the competencies required, a student needs to be investigative, curious, social, like working with people and communicating with them, artistic and creative. And apart from that, the other abilities are also mentioned. A student should have good knowledge of counseling, psychology, and therapy, though these might be just few of the roles that they play. It is a good idea for students in class 10 who are looking to pursue psychology in 11th and 12th to first understand the curriculum and syllabus for those 2 years. Given that they have not studied psychology beforehand, they could also speak to their seniors and their subject teachers at school to understand what they will have to prepare for if they are to choose this subject in 11th and 12th. So, this is important for any class 10 student who's looking to choose subjects for class 11th and 12th, that they understand the curriculum, they speak to the subject teachers, they also speak to the seniors in school so that they understand from a perspective of a student, a teacher, and also the curriculum. And maybe perhaps if they speak to someone who's a professional in that space, they might get a little more understanding of what the subject wants to teach them, and they are better informed when they're making those choices. For of course, for 11th and 12th students who are taking psychology, they would have a fair understanding of what will be coming their way in undergrad. But again, reading the curriculum for any course you want to choose is a good practice. And that is something that I would say as a blanket rule for anything that a student is looking at to pursue. So the work activities are also defined here for some of the roles that students will be looking at. I am not going into the other specializations as well, but uh, looking at educational psychology, like I mentioned earlier, also sports psychology, it's one emerging field where sports and psychology are intertwined. Most of the sports players that you see go through immense amounts of pressure. Now, to be able to deal with those types of pressures, where you're performing at the international level and the stakes are really high, we've seen sports psychologists being able to help such sports players and athletes in learning how to cope with that kind of pressure and not let it get the better of them. In fact, we have seen this in news of some of our very own cricket players who have been recovering from health issues and got the right kind of psychological treatment and therapy where they could get back to their game. And of course, a lot of sports is about belief. If you're not in the right mood, you tend to play badly. So here you can see sports psychologists play a very important role. Now, BA psychology focuses more on behavioral patterns and theory, whereas a BSc psychology tends to focus more on research, statistical elements that go behind research and psychological theory. Now, I would like to remind all of you career guides to encourage students to look up these courses and which are the colleges that offer these type of courses.
Let's move to two other careers that are interlinked with each other: sociology and anthropology. Sociology is the study of how human beings assimilate themselves into groups. Anthropology is the study of how human beings have evolved over time and what kind of structures they've created for themselves from the aspect of survival and sustenance. Now, you would see the application to sociology in multiple areas around. While some of us usually think that social work is the only application to it, today sociologists work in policy making, they work in education, they not only work in social work, of course, but they also have impacted laws, they have impacted how organizations structure themselves. And moving on to anthropology, we've not only seen that anthropologists work closely with archaeologists or historians, we've also seen anthropologists work with astronomers, trying to figure out if there's really life out there. We've also seen anthropologists work in the corporate space. For example, there was a very famous case study by Lego a couple of decades ago. With the advent of video games, toy makers like Lego almost were going out of business thanks to the change of interest of young adults or children moving from toys to visual based stimuli like video games itself. Now, an organization like Lego used its marketing team in trying to understand why that was so. The marketing team came back with a solution that probably Lego is something that takes a very long time. Video games have a faster reward system. It's faster to master the video game as well. So they thought, why not we make builds that are easier and faster to achieve? And Lego failed even more. Now they went back to the drawing board, got a couple of anthropologists who studied how children behave when they play. Now what they realized is there are of course some children who love spending time with video games and like doing stuff that they get a faster reward system. But there are always children who love spending time in honing skills that take a longer time to master. For example, if you look at sports players, musicians in your classroom, these are children who love to show their discipline on the field during practice, whether or not they like to show the same amount of discipline in the classroom. So they learned from there. They looked at a couple of children who liked skateboarding. Now, skating is not always the primary option for all children, of course, in India. But what the anthropologists realized is that it's one space that someone has to work on over and over again to master. When you have sports like this, that children are interested to master and thereby want to spend a lot of time trying to master it, it broke the common myth that said all children want faster reward systems. What the anthropologists told Lego was, you have a very set number of clientele. You got to make things more complicated for them, have more complex builds, and try and introduce them to your range of products. Lego went back, and today, Lego has been doing much better than what it did in the 90s. Why? Because Lego understood one fundamental element that anthropologists, sociologists, or experts in understanding human behavior probably will be able to give you better insights on how to market your products a little better. So you see how the humanities subjects help the corporate sector as well. You see how psychology, sociology, anthropology plays in very well with marketing and sales too. So let's look at the career portal to understand this pathway a little better.
Welcome back to the portal. Let's look at some of the other careers in humanities. We are going to club anthropology and sociology together. Now, when one clicks on the career, you can simply type the career on the search bar and you should be able to find the career there. Now, anthropology is a study of human beings over a period of time, understanding them both from a developmental perspective and how genetics and evolution has impacted physiological aspects of human beings. We also have seen anthropology as a great tool to understand why certain behaviors, certain superstitions as well have existed in the past. Now, when you look at anthropology, it is a scientist who studied the origin, the development, and the evolution of human beings from our ancient ancestors. Now, you could come from any stream, any subject, and you can find yourself in specializations like archaeology, cultural anthropology, linguistics anthropology, which is about the study of languages and how they were born, forensic anthropology, which you will find here in the specializations. Now, if you look at the kind of pathways available here, a student can study humanities along with any scheme of subjects and then pursue an undergrad in anthropology and then postgrad after that. You could come in from a science background as well. or you could study a history or archaeology and do a post graduation in anthropology. So it's an interdisciplinary field, given that we have discussed a couple of use cases for anthropology as well, even in sales and marketing. And the number of working years, the future prospects have always been great, given that there's a lot of applications for this space. The number of years of education required are between 17 and 23 years, depending on whether one wants to pursue a master's or master's plus PhD as well. And as I mentioned earlier, during psychology as well, there have been crossover areas where the human sciences and technology have merged to be able to make more user friendly products. Now, looking at the kind of colleges and universities that have this course, you would also be able to see a few role models that the student can look up to and understand their journeys. And of course, we were discussing the future prospects. Now, the good news is, even for students who want to study anthropology in the long term, you can go through a pathway of sociology and psychology as well. You can look at masters in anthropology without having studied anthropology in your graduation. And the same applies for sociology, social work, and also psychology. So we'll very quickly look at the competencies required, which is right at the bottom. One could also click the option on the left hand side here. A student who's investigative, artistic, and social, meaning someone who's curious, creative, and likes to be around people, or at least likes to understand people, this would be a great career opportunity for them. Reading comprehension, active listening, writing, active learning, interest in social elements, education, and training. These would be some of the skill sets that are good to have. And these are the areas that you can explain to your students that they need to work on to be able to be better prepared for this course. Now, whether you're looking at human resources or organizational behavior, you're looking at an application in education and teaching itself. Now, while I've covered anthropology here, you can also type sociology in the career space after clicking on the button careers on the home page and find out the careers for sociology as well. I've explained both of them together because they're very closely interrelated.
Moving on to the next career, with a subject like history, if you are a history teacher, you'd probably know this better than I do, that there are very few students who really enjoy the subject a lot. And we are here to change this misconception. History, interestingly, has a lot of career options that open up with it. Not only looking into UPSC, where it deals well into the GK and some of the areas in the UPSC exams. Now, it not only helps with preparing for entrance exams like the UPSC, but it also opens up new careers into archiving, into archaeology, into academics, of course. So one can become a teacher or a professor. But you'd also see history today now being used in game design as well. From all the games that I've seen over the last 20 years, I've seen historians, archaeologists, architects perhaps are hired more than any other domain. They're now hired in the gaming industry as well. So you see how new technology is bringing options open for some of the more conventional subject choices that students make. Now, history as a subject not only teaches you various elements of what's happened in the past, but it also helps you prepare for various entrance exams, helps you prepare for the UPSC or the civil services better as well. Now, let's look at the career portal to understand this better.
Welcome back to the portal. Now, looking at a career like historian, now looking at a career in history, it is one such subject that has an impact on any domain of any study. You can't have a study in any subject without understanding the history of that subject and that content. Now, looking at the type of allied careers with history, you will not only see careers in historian on the career portal, you would also see musicologist, you would also notice literature or liberal arts or even linguistics, let alone philosophy, understanding of theology, looking at social sciences and human development. Now, let's look at an example on its own. One could take a BA in history after any subject in 11th and 12th. However, keeping history in 11th and 12th is an added advantage for an application in certain universities. Today, we've seen historians who have become authors, who become experts in the entertainment sector as well, who have become consultants too. So, in the making of certain documentaries, certain period dramas, and movies, historians have also helped out uh, in being able to provide the correct information that could be portrayed. We've also seen historians being consulted in game design, given that a lot of games are now investing more and more on ensuring that the right kind of information and the most accurate information is depicted. Now, looking at the monthly earnings, you would see a steady increase in this space. Now, historians not only can become teachers or academics, which often seems to be one of the most popular choices there. Now, like we mentioned earlier, also, history is not one of the most popular subjects in school. We have seen a smaller set of students who find this subject extremely interesting. Now, this is without the understanding that history has its implications in almost any scheme of study out there. So, whether you're studying physics or sciences, studying the background on certain theories and how have they been propounded tend to be one of the aspects of history that people tend to ignore. Now, history encapsulates all of those elements together. Now, the number of years, uh, the kind of earnings, the amount of expenses in Indian rupees, the future prospects, we've seen a steady growth in all of these sectors. Looking at archaeology, museologists, bioarchaeologists, ethnoarchaeologists, people who study cultures and how they have evolved over time, forensic archaeologists as well. We've also seen today historians being hired in organizations like Netflix and other media companies where they have been consulted for the kind of content that gets put out. The educational requirements of number of years would be minimum of 17 to 23 years, depending on whether the individual wants to pursue a master's and a PhD after that. The kind of job opportunities are mentioned here. You could be an academic, a professor, a researcher, working for the Archaeological Survey of India, working with various other private organizations like we mentioned. These are some of the departments of tourism where like the Indian Council of Cultural Relations, the Indian Council of Historical Research, the Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage, the National Archives are all examples where history students could look out for. The job profile is mentioned here as well and the competencies required. Now, while archaeologists mostly work in the field, they will be working on different structures, remains, artifacts. Sometimes they'll be working in a very harsh climate as well. So it is important to inform students of the same. If archaeology is one of their choices, while they will get a lot of options to travel, it also has a set of physical challenges as well. Now, the other skill sets that are required are reading comprehension, active listening, critical thinking, oral comprehension, to written comprehension. These are other scheme of areas. These are other spectrum of areas that could be something that students need to prepare with. And of course, the work activities that they would expect to have as a fresher in this space. Now, often we have seen students take up a history in graduation to be able to pursue civil services, as there is a common notion that history is a good undergrad subject to have if someone wants to get into the civil services. However, the data on the number of people who crack the civil services does not adhere to this claim. So, a student can study any graduation degree at the bachelor's level and still pursue the UPSC examinations. There is no data that suggests that students will have to only study history to be able to pursue this better. We always recommend students to pursue a graduation degree in a subject that they like, that they enjoy, so that even if they don't crack through certain common entrance exams, post that to be able to get into jobs, they can still further study in or specialize in the area that they've studied in graduation so that they have more career options that are open. So it's fundamentally important that one takes up a graduation subject that they really enjoy. And this could be something that is recommended to students who definitely enjoy studying history as a subject.
Moving on to another career, which does not strictly fall under the humanities, but it's more of an interdisciplinary subject. You guessed it right, we're talking about geography. Now, interestingly, in India, we almost always assume that geography is a humanities subject, but a lot of the areas of focus for geography is a little more science oriented. So, while a student can study humanities and go into a course like a BA geography or an MA geography, a science student can pursue geography and open up other avenues as well. For example, geology, weather forecasting systems, map making systems also. So, whether you're looking at geography as a humanities subject or an interdisciplinary science, geography has an impact in multiple areas across the world. Whether you're looking at how you use your Google Maps to travel from one location to another, that's a geographer who's helped you out. Or whether it is you ordering a product sitting at home where a, a product from one part of the country has reached your doorstep, there's a geographer who's helped make mapping systems to make that journey a little easier. Now, interestingly, geography opens up a lot of avenues not only into understanding mapping and weather systems, but it's also necessary in averting disaster. So, you have disaster management teams who come from backgrounds in geography as well. So, it's a very, very essential career. We've seen over the last 10 to 15 years that the kind of natural calamities and what type of preparations would have been helpful in avoiding maximum damage from those natural calamities. Let's look at the career portal to understand the kind of career opportunities that are available with geography a little better.
We were discussing careers in geography, and like we were mentioning, we are looking at geography not only as a humanities based career, but it's also something that is available to students from all spheres, including sciences. Now, when one looks at a geographer as a career option, you would find it under humanities, liberal arts, social sciences. And keeping science in 11th and 12th opens up more career options like geomatics, geosciences, cartography, geoinformatics, and so on. Or even if you're looking at areas like geopolitics, human geography, or even disaster management, science is a good combination of subjects to have in 11th and 12th to build a great base to pursue geography in all its spheres. Having science in 11th and 12th would ensure a student is able to pursue all forms of geography. Now we see that geography has a lot of applications in everyday life. You will see students who can go from a humanities subject and pursue a BA or bachelor's in arts and geography. We've seen students who take up physics, chemistry, and mathematics get into BSc geography and MSc geography, and if they want to pursue it a little longer and specialize in a specific area, they go into a PhD as well. The number of years of education required would be between 17 to 25 years. It's slightly higher than many other courses, but do remember that the careers in humanities tend to be research oriented and more theoretical in nature. The future prospects are great. There are a lot of options for growth. The amount of expenses would range from 80,000 to about 70 lakh, depending on the kind of course, number of years, and the college as well. The types of job opportunities mentioned here for a person who is just starting off in this space would be between a junior research fellow after post graduation, could be an assistant professor as a PhD pursuant, GIS mapping assistant, geo-analyst trainee, remote sensing assistant, where remote sensing is applicable in the automobile, the aircraft, and largely the technology sector, demographer, cartographer, or other applications to this space. Now, some organizations that students will find jobs are between colleges and universities, IT services, companies involved in GIS technologies, agriculture industry, wildlife conservation agencies, information technology companies such as Accenture and so on, environmental consultancies, tourism and planning industry as well. The work environment, while this is a generic statement given here, there might be flexible working times depending on different types of responsibilities that one might have. The competencies required, one definitely needs to be investigative and also social. Investigative meaning being curious, being more research oriented, and like to work with people and understand people and their behaviors. So the work activities would be analysis and interpretation of data, communicating with co-workers, estimating quantity, costs, and other areas that we would recommend students to read in more detail. Now, while geography is a subject that students typically study till 10th under social studies, in 11th and 12th, it is more commonly offered in schools with the arts subject or the humanities combination. We have seen certain schools do allow geography as a flexible combination with any scheme of studies as well. So while one has physics and mathematics along with geography, it could a combination that works very effectively for students who are looking to pursue more areas of research in geography, in GIS technology, and disaster management as well.
Looking at the next subject, political science. Now, political science constitutes of civics, understanding the Indian constitution, understanding the rights and liberties of all our citizens. Now, how would one student apply that knowledge in building a career of their own? We've seen the application of that in areas like law, in areas like public policy, and also is a good subject to have if an individual wants to become a politician as well. We have a lot of opportunities for educated politicians in India. Now, if a student likes to understand those elements a little better, that would be a one fantastic subject to take on. You also have options in psephology, which is the study of elections that helps individual understand election patterns and trends. Every time we watch the news during the election season, you'd see an expert talking about what are the voting mechanisms and what are the voting patterns of people in a certain demography. Now that's where psephology comes into play, which is a subset of political science. Now let's look at what are the kind of options beyond psephology as well on the career portal.
We are looking at political sciences. Now, if you're looking at a career in allied courses in political sciences, you'd find options like political analysts, political scientists, and you'd also see aspects of application in public affairs, policy expertise, rural development, also social human development. Of course, the additional areas would also be in education and research too. Now, political analyst has been one career option that has come into the limelight in the last few years, given the success of how these individuals or organizations help political parties campaign for themselves during election season. So, if you want to get involved in politics, of course, a political analyst is one way to go. A student can study any scheme of studies in 11th and 12th, then pursue a bachelor's in arts in political science, post that a PG or postgraduate course, and then a PhD. So you can come from a background in mathematics and economics as well, or take a political science plus mathematics where one could actually look at psephology, which is an analysis of electoral behavior of individuals from a certain place. So you'd find that specialization mentioned in one of these areas too. As long as there are political systems that govern countries, the future prospects for someone who's working political science has always been increasing over the last few years. Now, while the initial salaries are not the highest, we have seen a significant growth depending on how successful one has been in this space. So, you would see students study a BA in political science and then pursue an MA in it. Looking at the maximum and minimum number of years is between 17 and 23 years. Here are a few examples of role models who have worked in this space, kind of job opportunities where most of the universities and colleges will hire you as a professor or as a junior or an assistant professor. If you are into research, you will also be hired at the position of a research associate. You may also work as a political analyst, a public opinion analyst with print, TV, and online media houses. You may join as a political consultant with various non government bodies as well, or public policy analyst with public policy organizations. So, a few of the places that one would see themselves working in is in embassies and political parties, in NGOs, working on political studies. Colleges and universities, of course, have been discussed earlier. Public administration, public policies related to research companies, policymakers, media, UN and its other agencies are few other examples where people with a political science background could see themselves working in. The job profiles are mentioned here. Often, a political scientist will use qualitative methods to do research. Through these qualitative methods, you would gather information on different resources. Some of the methods include using historical documents to analyze past government structures and policies as well. So, if a student is interested in this space or was interested in a subject like civics in class 10, that's a good indicator if they can pursue political science in 11th and 12th as well. However, we would always go back to our formula of reading the curriculum, speaking to a senior, speaking to a subject teacher as well, to understand exactly what 11th and 12th syllabus would look like. The competencies required would be someone who's investigative and curious, someone who's artistic and creative, and someone who's social, who likes working with people and likes understanding how people function. And other aspects of work activities and other skills that are required with personality wise and so on are also mentioned here in detail.
one of the greatest achievements of human beings is to be able to build systems of communication that are complex, that are varied, that are able to explain every single feeling, every single idea with each other. You guessed it right, it's languages. Now, whether you look at any language across the world, the fundamental purpose is to be able to help individuals communicate with each other. Now, think about all of those jobs where human communication is absolutely necessary. Studying languages and their origins is one of those ways to be able to understand how human beings communicate better, what are the most efficient systems there, and you would see its applications in multiple careers as well. For example, an Indian lawyer who understands foreign languages as well would probably attract overseas clients as well. Or if an individual in the corporate sector learns multiple languages, there are advantages in the way the person problem solves, there are advantages in the way the person communicates, and there are publications that talk about how human beings are able to switch their personalities basis the languages that they speak in. Now, those are few of the advantages of knowing multiple languages. So, we've seen the use of languages even in embassies, being able to be diplomats for various countries. We've seen the use of languages in almost every aspect of our life. I can't think of a way where we could have communicated all of this training material to you without the existence of a language. So you understand how important a subject like various languages are. All the primary and secondary languages that are taught in school teach certain skill sets and certain abilities to students. Now let's look at the various options that are opened with languages itself. Whether you're looking at an interpreter or a translator, you're looking at someone who has additional languages as a skill set. We in India, by default, know at least 2 to 3 languages there. Now that's a very big advantage over many other countries. We are able to set ourselves in multiple situations, build contexts that are relevant to that specific demography. We're able to think in multiple different ways, be excellent problem solvers, thanks to knowing multiple languages itself. It helps our neurons create more complex connections and thereby build better skill sets as well. Now let's look at the various options available with languages on the career portal.
Looking at the kind of options that a student who has an expertise in languages can pursue, one can be an interpreter or a translator, but one need not be an expert on any single language. Most students in India are already multilingual or trilingual, so you can either have an expertise in Hindi or any other regional language and still find career options there. Now, apart from academics, a student can also look at the variety of options that are given here on the screen as well. One could be a computational linguist, a neurolinguist, a cognitive linguist, socio or developmental linguist, a biological or evolutionary linguist or clinical linguist, and other forms of linguistics as well. Now, a student can pursue this from any scheme of studies in 11th and 12th, pursue an undergraduation in a language or linguistics, or pursue an undergrad in humanities or any other allied courses. Now, typically, a linguist is someone who studies languages and the origins and looks at the way the language has been used in trying to figure out how these languages are connected to others. Now, when we are looking at the future of work, a linguist could also find work in computational linguistics, like I mentioned earlier. In trying to develop machine language, a neurolinguist, a cognitive linguist, a social linguist, or an evolutionary linguist, these are few of the specialization areas that we've discussed. You would notice that these students come from any stream or any subject combination, also could take a particular language and specialize in them further at the post graduation. Moving on to the kind of competencies required, while of course students can use these expertise in languages to not only write, become authors, and teach, students would also need to have an interest in areas that are far more pertinent to this space, like having, like being curious and being investigative, being creative, being social. Apart from that, have abilities that are mentioned here on the screen. The growth prospects have always been great. A student can look at being an interpreter or a translator to work in the political space. One has also seen that having a knowledge of an additional language tends to be advantageous in any form of career, because that could enable you to go and work in a certain geography as well. So, whether you're looking at areas like diplomacy, international relations, or even defense forces or intelligence forces, you would see the future prospects that have been rather stable and a lot of opportunities available thereby.
Moving on to another area which brings a joy to all the creative students in your classroom, which is fine arts. I'm sure there are students in your classroom that love painting, drawing. Some of them even love sketching on the desks that they're sitting at. Now, fine arts is one of those careers that open up sculpture, pure painting, music, and opens up a whole avenue of creative careers for students. Now, a few of the advantages in such creative careers: an individual who likes expressing themselves would be able to find a calling in an area like fine arts. Let's look at the various types of career options for artists who are looking at fine arts as a degree course and what kind of opportunities that entails. Let's look at the career portal for the same.
Now, moving on to the last career within careers in humanities, inside art and design again, we have gone through some of these options here. When we're talking about careers in design, uh, let's look at some of the careers for artists who are taking up courses like Bachelors of Fine Arts, which involves elements of music, painting, sculpture, nail art, or tattoo design as well. And the primary difference between an artist and a designer is that the artist might not always make art that has a specific application. The designer, on the other hand, is able to make sense of both sciences and the arts to make sure that it solves a particular problem and it also has a specific application. Now, for an artist, the pathway could be a scheme of studies in any stream in 11th and 12th, post that pursuing an undergrad course in Bachelor's in Fine Arts. Now, coming back to art, given that it's so open ended, it tends to be a career that involves a lot of risk when it comes to employment as well. We've seen a lot of art practitioners become teachers and educators. We've seen them become art curators or art dealers, apart from becoming, of course, an artist. We've also seen them work in design spaces after having a certain set of skills or learning them from a specific course. Now, an art dealer is someone who understands paintings, the kind of traditional and non traditional areas of art, which could either be in oil, in photography, in digital art, or traditional folk art. It could be in installation art and handicrafts as well, and they play a very, very important role in trying to bring focus and tourism to a certain place. An artist is someone who creates art, an art dealer is someone who ensures that there is enough trade to provide sustenance for the artist. So you would find art dealer and other specializations mentioned here. You could directly type art dealer on the search option here as well. So whether you're an artist or not, you can definitely find yourself working in the space of an art dealer. You would see that the type of expenses that are mentioned here between 60,000 to almost 8 lakhs. The number of years of experience required in this space would be variable. The future prospects are high, but we have seen that between the entry level to the mid level, the major challenge is having a livable income. So, which is why students are recommended to keep a backup option and pursue art on the side. So, this could be challenging for individuals without a financial support system. So, there is an additional risk area that parents and teachers and career guides like yourself need to educate students before they are going on a journey in creative areas like this. So while you look at job opportunities which are in the fine arts auction houses, you would see that art galleries or museums, these individuals are working in regularly. You would need to have a student who's investigative. When you look at the competencies required, who's investigative, who's realistic, who's social, who has a knowledge of history and archaeology, and also fine arts. And like I mentioned earlier, history has an impact on almost every subject out there. Your abilities would also require abilities like fluency of ideas, inductive reasoning, visualization, abstract reasoning, oral expression, and verbal reasoning. Now, most of these colleges that you would apply to for a bachelor's in fine arts will have an admissions process that includes an interview and also an assessment of the student's artistic ability. Whether it is in music or in painting or in sculpture, a student is expected to have certain elements that are understood and develop a certain amount of expertise in those areas through practice. So it could include an audition in case of performing arts. It could include a drawing test in case of fine arts. So these could be some of the admissions criteria for certain colleges in India as well.